Okay, good evening, everyone. I can't blame the traffic. I guess people are still sick and traveling. I am sweating. I apologize for that. We are in Judges chapter 18. The material that I handed out is on Judges 17 through 21, and it basically is what we covered Sunday morning, except for I put it down in written form and added material and tweaked it a little bit so that instead of having religion, morality, families, and nation, then it's religion, morality, families, society, which leads to the downfall of the nation. And if you think about the downfall of the nation, probably the most famous written material on that is the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire. And he gives some, specific things within his book on that, such as, too many holidays, too much free bread for the too much circus, basically. But if you put into 4 different categories, it's the internal damage caused by the decline of Roman virtue and patriotism, the destructive influences of barbarian invasions, and the conversion to Christianity. It's kind of interesting to put those two together. The abuse of the empire's vast resources and the internal political instability and corruption. And I find it interesting that one of the reasons Gibbons gave for the fall of the Roman Empire was Christianity. And it's the exact opposite within the book of Judges and then 1st, 2nd Samuel and 1st, 2nd Kings and 1st, 2nd Chronicles. Instead of going from paganism to God's religion, it's going from God's religion to paganism. But either way, the change in religion destabilizes the nations. So if you look at the sheet, basically, like I said, it's just what we went over on Sunday. I just put it in written form. But when we look at the rest of the epilogue, which is the not so short ending to the book, we find that these 4 degrading systems will continue to exist. So look for them in the book, or the end of the book. Let's start in chapter 18, starting in verse 1. If you remember correctly, in chapter 17, excuse me. Micah stole 1,100 pieces of silver from his mother. He confessed and gave it back. She said, "You're such a good son. Here, take it. In fact, let's make a good old idol for you out of this." And then he found a wandering Jew who was a wandering Levitical Jew, and he made him his priest, and he became like a father to him. And then Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest." And chapter 18 is going to continue with some of those characters. Now, in those days, there was no king of Israel. That is a repeated theme that we find. You see back in chapter 17, in verse 6, "In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." In chapter 18, it begins, "In those days, there was no king of Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in, for until that day, an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel." Now, I don't know if this means that this is taking place more at the beginning or what. I do know that they were given their allotments, and then some of them did not take them. So the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of their whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Estaol. Anybody remember where we saw Zora and Eshtaol in the book of Judges? Oh, it was in the story of Samson. That was the family of his parents. So they sent valiant men from Zora and Eshtaol to spy out the land and to explore it. And they said to them, "Go explore the land." And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and stayed there overnight. Okay, so they sent out men to spy the land. That reminds you of anything? Yeah, this is done twice before. One time it was a failure under Moses. The second time it was a success under Joshua. And this time it's not going to be a national spying out, but it's a repeating thing. Okay, so they come to Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and they stayed there overnight. When they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned aside there and said, "Who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here?" He said to him, "Micah has done this and that for me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest." Okay, when you look at verse 4, what religious problems do you see exhibited in verse 4? You don't find in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, because Jesus talked about hirelings not being true shepherds. So they're hiring a priest. Do you know of any other place in the Bible where a priest was a priest to just one individual? No, it doesn't happen. You are priests for God for the nation. So we're seeing there's flaws in this from a religious perspective. He's hired. That's not a biblical concept. And he is an individual priest. That is also not an individual concept. When you become an individual priest, where your sole income is dependent upon one person, what possible danger might that give? The smiles on your faces says it. Daryl.
In chapter 17, the Levite that stayed with Micah, is this the same one that they hired?
Yes. Yeah.
So this is the same priest that stayed with Micah. So Micah hired him.
Yeah, Micah hired him as his priest. You're my special priest. And then we're going to see what this priest does when he's offered a better paycheck.
That he was given a salary, or is he counting his room and board as being high? Do we have more information?
You go back to verse 10 of chapter 17. I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a supply of clothing, and your sustenance. So I guess probably room and board. Would that be included under sustenance? At least that's food. What else is involved, I don't know. Jared, your hand was raised?
Yeah, you asked about when preaching and having your sole source of income be from one person. And it just made me think about, when we were in Venice, we went into the St. Mark's Basilica. And on one side, you have the lectern or pulpit, whatever you call it, for priest, or for the bishop. And then on the other side, you have the one for the Doge. And if you just go a little bit further from where the Doge's one is his palace. And so you can just walk from his palace up to the lectern and say, this is what this is what the church is going to tell you about today. Because they're going to do what I told them to do, or they're not going to be here.
Yep. In today's world, we don't have a situation where, you know, we'll take a preacher, for example, because a preacher can be paid. We don't have an example in any part of my own experiences where one person has a preacher all to himself and provides all of the sustenance for him, the money, whatever, the food. What's the closest we might come to it in today's world?
Any of us to have someone that, I don't know whether you use the word depend or not, but someone that we feel comfortable about going to and discussing Bible subjects. So I don't know whether that's what you're getting at.
No, but that's a good point. It's important to have people you can confide in and ask questions about. Daryl?
Like this priest is going to be like one of the TV preachers that you hear that's going to have his own place, $1 million place, a $high house, and $high cars, and airplane.
An airplane, yeah. Doing it for the money, and we'll see that when he switches his employer in just a few verses. Anybody else? Can you think of the closest maybe we can come to where a preacher receives a lot of support from one person? Maybe a missionary. You ever heard of a congregation that basically almost the entire contribution is from one person, one family? I've been told, that's all I can say, is that it does happen. And wrongfully so, but it is realistically so. Who do you think often has the most influence in that congregation? The one that's paying. That's right. There's a congregation that I heard of that the main benefactor in the congregation is a female. I don't know anything about her. I don't know anything other than she apparently is very rich. And everything goes her way. And that's wrong, not because she's a female. That's wrong because that's one person who is running everything.
Giving of her means to the Lord.
That is not wrong at all. What's wrong is when any of us, okay, let's broaden this up. Have you ever heard somebody say, maybe Frank as an elder, you've experienced this. Tom, you've been an elder, maybe you've experienced this, where people come up to you and say, if you don't do this, or if you stop doing this, I'm taking my contribution and I'm leaving. You've seen that? Yeah. Frank, have you ever experienced that? Okay.
I've also heard it said, someone, it's my way and highway.
Yep.
Being one of the elders.
Yep, being one of the elders. So the problems that we see here in Judges chapter 18, we can say, oh, how quaint, how sinful of them, how horrible. I can't imagine any. We see the principle even in application today, where people say, if I don't get my way, I'm withholding my contribution, or if it's the richest person in the contribution, richest person in the congregation, you better not upset me because, I'm the one that supports the preacher, pays the gas bill, pays the electric bill, pays the AC and everything. Yes.
And I don't think this is what they're talking about. But if the person doing that is doing that because they believe something is wrong and it's got to be done the way they see the Bible teaches it. I think that's different.
That's different than what I'm talking about. Yes. This is someone that is basically using their power for the wrong. Yeah. Anybody else before we go on? Next verse. Okay. Let's see, verse 5. Then they said to him, "Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we are going will be successful." And this is something that is a good thing to do. They're asking somebody who's probably illegitimate, not a priest after the bloodline of Aaron. He's just a Levite wandering around. But, it's a good thing. Inquire of God that we may know whether or not which we are going will be successful. Verse 6, and the priest said, "Go in peace, your way in which you are going has the Lord's approval." We have no idea if he inquired or if he just, gave them the go-ahead. We don't know. So the 5 men departed and came to Laish and saw the people who were living in security in the way of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, for there was no oppressive ruler humiliating them for anything in their land. And they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. When they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, again, the homeland of Samson's parents, their brothers said to them, "What do you say?" They said, "Arise, let's go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good," reminiscent of what Caleb and Joshua said. "And will you sit still? Do not hesitate to go, to enter, to take possession of the land. When you enter, you will come to an unsuspecting people with a spacious land, for God has handed it over to you, a place where there is not a lack of anything that is on the earth." Again, what did Caleb and Joshua and even some of the other spies, what did they say about the land of Canaan when they came into it? Yeah, milk and honey. So it's lacking nothing. It'd be like today, you're looking for a new house and you find a 5-bedroom house with 4.5 bathrooms and 3 acres of land, and all they want for it is trade them your old car. And then it's just like, okay, perfect. Nope, it's in the northern part. Tyre and Sidon were nations, or cities actually, north of Israel. And Dan is probably the furthest, most northern city in Israel at this time. Yes. Well, remember, the Philistines were ruling them, so they weren't staying in their cities. Anybody else? Yes.
I've always thought God's message to the people when they came into the land about, I'm giving you the land, the vineyards are already planted, houses are already built. I really thought that was a good message showing God's love for his people.
Absolutely. And if I remember the passage correctly, where that's found, he not only says, all of that, he says, don't think I chose you because of your righteousness. You're not getting this because you're righteous. And it's all a sign of God's grace and love to them, which is a good reminder for us all. Okay, so verse 11. Then from the family of the Danites, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, 600 men armed with weapons of war set out. They went up and kept at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they called that place to this day, because I don't know how to pronounce it, Mahanadan, we'll just say. And they passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Now, when they come back to Micah, we're going to find out what they do. Then the 5 men who went to spy out the country of Laish said to the kinsman, do you know that there are in these houses an ephod and household idols and a carved image and a cast metal image? Now then, consider what you should do. So they turned aside there and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, to the house of Micah, and asked him how he was doing, which is kind of manipulative, I guess, maybe. Meanwhile, the 600 men armed with their weapons of war, who were the sons of Dan, were positioned at the entrance of the gate. Now the 5 men who went to spy out the land went up and entered there. They took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the cast metal image, because that is what good, godly Israelites need to do, right? They're stealing from their own people. They're stealing idols from... Okay, so while the priest was standing at the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war, when these men entered Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the cast metal image, the priest said to him, what are you doing? And they said to him, be silent. Put your hand over your mouth and go with us and be to us a father and a priest, which is what he was to Micah. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be a priest to a tribe and a family in Israel? So the priest's heart was glad, which again shows that his motivations were never that pure. And he took the ephod, which is what priests wore, the household idols, and the carved image, and went among the people. So again, we see that the priest's motives were not stellar. Again, I suggest most likely he probably wasn't of the bloodline of Aaron. We see in verse 21, then they turned and left and put the children, the livestock, and the valuables in front of them. When they had distanced themselves from Micah's house, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house assembled by command and overtook the sons of Dan. Then they called out to the sons of Dan, who turned around and said, Micah, what is the matter with you that you have assembled together? Well, it's kind of obvious why he's assembled and why he's upset at them. He's been the victim of thievery. He said, you have taken my gods, which I made, and the priest, and have gone away. What more do I have? So how can you say to me, what is the matter with you? Have you ever seen somebody who knew that they were doing something wrong and then they just look up to the people and said, what's your problem? Well, that's what's going on here. What's your problem? What's the matter? I said, you know what the matter is. You know what you did. Then the sons of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, or else fierce men will attack you, and you will lose your life and the lives of your household. Had Micah done anything to deserve that to them? None at all. These are violent people. They were given the authority by God to capture cities within the land of Canaan as their inheritance, but they were not given the authority by God to rob their fellow Israelites, steal their household idols, and then threaten to kill them if they made a fuss. So they're taking their right action and turning it into a wrong action, and taking the authority that was given to them and making it go beyond what was ever their right to do. So the sons of Dan went on their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. Then they took what Micah had made and the priests who had belonged to him and came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire. And there was no one to save them, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. And it was in the valley which is near Beth Rehob, so they rebuilt the city and lived in it. and they named the city Dan. So it was the tribe of Dan, and now it's the city of Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city was previously Laish. The sons of Dan set up for themselves the carved image. I want to stop there. So what should that remind you of? A carved image, or an image or idol being set up in Dan. Yeah, Jeroboam. When Jeroboam created the golden calves, he put one at the very bottom and one at the very top of his kingdom. What was the city at the very bottom? Bethel, yep, which ironically means house of God. And then at the very top of the city, Dan. What was the purpose for Jeroboam to put the golden calves at those two locations? Yeah, convenience for his people. So they would not go down to Jerusalem. And so it made it easier for them. So we've got hints of what will happen later, happening here in Judges, foreshadowing that. Yes? Lee?
Is Zidon and the Zidonians, is it Jerusalem?
No. It is a nation that was north of Israel. Do you remember the king Hiram who helped David with the materials so Solomon could build the temple? Hiram, yeah. That was his nation. He gave the number, yeah. From, let's see, were they Cedars? Yeah, Cedars, Lebanon. So the nation that they're talking about, the Sidonians, was where he later would be king. Anybody else?
We see Sidon a whole lot of times as Tyre and Sidon together. Both cities on the coast, I guess, close behind.
Yeah, they were
When one's mentioned, it seems like the others.
sort of like Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah. Often mentioned together. Anybody else?
I'm confused.
Good, 'cause I'm confused. What are you confused
On
about?
my map, Dan is down here. Sidon is up here. Did you explain that and I just didn't get it, or what?
They were given a land that was down south, but now they're looking for some more land, different location. And that's earlier in the book of Judges or Joshua, I forget which one. And so they start wandering around to try to find more land. Yes, and they're going north. So they were given land, but I can't remember if it was too small for them or they had trouble gaining it. I don't remember. And if I remember correctly, Joshua just said, well, go find something and take it. Does anybody remember better than that? That's what I remember. Joshua said, you go find something and you just take it. And that's what they end up doing. Probably a Canaanite city, and became named Dan when these Danites took it. Now, when we think of the tribes, we often think of just one little area, and basically that was it was originally. But remember, for example, the half tribe of Manasseh. It had two allotments, one on the east side of Jordan and one on the south side or west side of Jordan. And then, the Danites, they were given an allotment. They complained about it. And so Joshua says, they can go take whatever you want. I'll try to find where that passage is later. I don't remember where it is right now.
Like, I guess she was looking at. It looks like a little river, narrow, long. Maybe they had something to complain about. Or it could have been the topography.
Yeah. I don't remember. I'll have to do some more research on that. Yeah. Anybody else? Unless anybody's got more on that. the original allotment of Dan versus them taking new territory. If y'all come up with something, let me know. Okay, so verse 30, the sons of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. Well, what does that mean, until the day of the captivity of the land? Yeah, Syria come in. So you've got this false religion being practiced for the next several hundred years up there in Little Dan. And so we got them starting off with one false priest, and now they're going to be having their own set of false priests. And when Jeroboam set up a priesthood, what was basically the one requirement in order to be a priest under Jeroboam? You can't be a Levite. So anybody from any tribe. So you see the degradation of the priesthood throughout here. Anybody else? Okay. So,
To the Levites.
yeah.
Just a thought.
Levites and the lineage of Aaron, very much so.
When the split happened, north and south, Levites, they headed south. They wanted to be associated with Jerusalem
Yep.
in the north.
That is true.
So they really didn't want to have anything to do with what was going on.
I can't remember if they headed south before Jeroboam set up the golden calves or afterwards.
Kind of that. Rehoboam and Jeroboam had that first split.
Right.
Almost came to civil war. I think that's when they departed.
Let's see if I can find it real quick. Second. Or 1 Kings 12, is that right?
Deuteronomy 12,
Here it is.
19 says, "Be careful that you do not forsake the Levites as long as you live in your land." And that's maybe not all sorted out, but this Levite was wandering around anyway.
Where is that found again?
Deuteronomy 12,
Deuteronomy 12.
19.
Yeah, they were required, if you look in the handout I gave you, they were originally given 40, let's see, how many cities were they given? It's like, I thought I had it in here. Maybe I did and took it out. Like, they originally were given like 46 cities throughout all of the land of Israel. 48, yes, thank you. The Levites were given 48 cities, and that included, 6 cities of refuge. And so we're having to wander around. They neglected the Levites. Anybody else? Jared, and then Paul.
I like the New American Commentary. Daniel Block wrote this, and I appreciate his assessment of the ending, of chapter 18 and kind of the sad state of affairs here. He points out, first of all, that, the belief that, sin is, sin brings on a curse, blessings come with obedience, is not always, immediate and obvious. And in this particular example, in his estimation, and I think he's right, sin, quote unquote, wins. Mm-hmm. Right? Israel has become fully Canaanized, essentially. We see, a mercenary a priesthood that's mercenaries. We see pagan rituals. We see, just evil throughout the land, and that was allowed to flourish. It was not swiftly crushed. And he makes the application saying success is not necessarily a sign of righteousness or an indication that we must be doing something right. And he includes that as a warning for, as he puts, the church at the close of the 20th century, based on when this was written. But
Which goes back to chapter 17, verse 13.
13.
And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord
Will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest." Yeah.
I think that is a solid warning for us today. How many times have we assumed that if something is working, or we agree with something and it's going well, or whatever, that it is because of God? We can see it in the things we do as a church. We can see it in the things we do as people. We can see it in the things we do as a nation. All of those. The person who is abandoning their relationship with the other Christians in the church by not ever gathering with the congregation to worship, because in their mind they've got other things that are more important right now. Like, I've got to work, I've got to earn money, and they're earning money and they're able to stay stable in their life, and so they think, okay, that feeds in. Okay, I'm doing well, so God must be okay with it, right?
God wouldn't have given me this race, which meant I have to
Miss church if he didn't want me to.
That. And that becomes sticky, right? We see it in the church. Maybe we're doing something that we think is successful, but is not necessarily, endorsed by God's word. We see it as a nation. And how often have we said, whatever our nation is doing is right because God supports it, As a people, as a church, as a nation, all these things, we tend to assume that just because something is going right in our eyes, that God approves of it.
Yeah, reading the proverbial
Tea leaves, so to speak. That's basically what you're talking about, right? When you know you're doing that which is right, and things are working out, and you've got approval from God, whether specifically or in generic authority, then it's more proper to say, God is causing this good to happen. What we see here in these couple chapters, and what you're talking about, is when people are doing wrong, but then they're successful at it, then they excuse it by saying, well, then apparently God is for what I am doing. And we can see that nowadays, maybe in one of the most common excuses you hear for people when they are in relationships that they should not be in. They'll say, doesn't God want me to be happy? And so they're leaving what God has revealed, and they're saying, well, God has brought this person in my life. Apparently, I'm supposed to be with that person, or God has brought this lifestyle into that I didn't know I had, or God has brought this job, and I know it's going to cause me to neglect my family, but so on and so forth. It is rationalization. I think it's important for us when we are looking at everyday life to try to find God active in it. Because I do believe that God is still involved in our lives. But we have to be careful that we're not assigning evil to God. God is active in our lives, and He approves of what we're doing when what we're doing is approved by Him already in Scripture. But when we decide to try to go against Him, and then we somehow have success, then we want to give the glory to God. But who's really behind that success? Satan, yeah, Satan. You know, ourselves too, but you know, Satan is behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you give yourself.
Look how good I am. Look how smart I am.
Look how talented I am. It seems like too often people want to blame God when something bad happens instead of blaming the devil. And too often they want to glorify God for their sin, but it's leading to success when that's when the devil is actually responsible. We flipped it upside down. Anybody else? Paul.
It's possible, but I misunderstood this reading. Let me ask you about this. In verse 14, it seemed to imply to me that when these men from Dan heard about having a graven image in Micah's household, they didn't approve of that. But they stole it, and then later on, they set it up for themselves. In verse 30, I guess.
So, what do you think suggested
They didn't approve of it.
Well, do you know that in these houses there's an idol, a graven image, and a molten image? I guess maybe the tone of voice, like you say, may have something to do with it.
Oftentimes,
I've said I wish we could hear the tone of voice. Maybe that last sentence could have thrown you off. Now then, consider what you should do. Could be like a warning. Consider what you should do. You're doing something wrong. But I think the idea is basically saying, consider what you should do about all of this. We're going to come back and get this. Yeah. Anybody else? Look at the last verse. We saw verse 30, it said that the priests that were of the sons of Gershom were the tribe of, were priests until the day that the Assyrians took the northern kingdom away. Verse 31 says, so they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, for which he had made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. What was the house of God? Yeah, the tabernacle. And the Shiloh was the main home for it, and we'll see that even in the book of 1 Samuel. And so we're seeing longevity for the sin that started in Micah's household with him stealing 1,100 pieces of silver from his mother, and them neglecting as a nation the Levites. And you again look at the sheet, the fourfold fall of a nation. These chapters are going to be, you've got degradation of religion, which we just saw, because they had within there that they were still worshiping idols in chapter 18. The degradation of morality. They stole just like Micah stole from his mother. Now Micah's being stolen from. Lex talionis, the law of retribution. Then you also have them threatening to kill them. You've got the third one, downfall of the families. I don't necessarily see anything about the downfall of societies, of families, but he does mention families. But you do see that the society is beginning to to fall apart, and eventually it will lead to the destruction of the entire nation, which is stated when it says that this remained until they were exiled from the land. So you're seeing again the fourfold destruction or fall of a nation: fall of religion, fall of morality, fall of family, and the fall of society. Now that's the end of class. Anybody got any questions, comments, or disagreements?
I'm sure some of you may be familiar with the word kintsugi. It's a Japanese word. Kintsugi is the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by mending the cracks with lacquer mixed with gold, silver, or platinum. The technique not only restores the vase, but also highlights its history and imperfections, making it more beautiful and valuable. When I first heard about this years ago, I saw the similarities of what God does for us through his Son, Jesus Christ. We too are broken because of sin, Our lives are in 1,000 little pieces, a vessel that is grievously broken by sin. But when we come to Christ, he takes those pieces and glues us back together, not with gold, silver, or platinum, but with his precious blood. He makes us into a beautiful vessel to be used for his purpose and glory. It astounds me that God can take our failures and make something beautiful out of it. When David sinned by committing adultery and having Uriah murdered, David's repentance was beautiful. Where would we be without the 51st Psalm? David's admission that he is a sinner and needs forgiveness resonates with all of us. God can also put you back together again. If you're not in Christ, you can be by believing and being baptized. Let Christ turn your brokenness into something beautiful. If we can help you in any way this evening, come forward now as we stand and sing.
It's good to see each of you tonight. I'd like to, Retha tells me that Jennifer is doing well as to be expected. She's still very, I say weak after surgery, low energy, and so, but she's doing all right, and we're thankful for that. Mark is nursing Janine tonight. They go back in for more dialysis tomorrow, or they will go for dialysis tomorrow. Today she had the catheter put in her chest, and that was quite an ordeal. And so she's resting and getting prepared for the 5-hour exercise that they'll do tomorrow in the dialysis process. So it's quite an undertaking. We don't really realize it. Dialysis at home. I didn't know people could have dialysis at home. But what do I know? Everybody that ever had dialysis I knew had to get in the car and go somewhere. Down on Due West Avenue to the dialysis clinic. But we're thankful that she can do that at home, and miracles of modern medicine and modern machinery and all of that stuff. So we're thankful for that. I got to tell you a funny story. I got my cataracts fixed 3 weeks ago. Hugh got his cataracts fixed last week and this week. You know, he was Hollywood Sunday morning in his glasses. And I was going to talk about it, but he did, so I didn't have to. But Anita was very, very, very concerned about Hugh and getting his cataracts. Frank, did you have to wear your glasses? What did you do? I said, I drove to Hopkinsville the day after I had my cataracts. I said, I didn't have any problems. I'm doing just fine. I see better than ever. I don't have any problems. Well, Hugh was working out on the deck today and got the steps wet and turned around and rolled down the steps. So his feelings are hurt, his head is hurt, and he just he blew what little energy he had left away when he rolled down the steps. So he called me and said, I can't do it tonight. I've got to stay home and rest. So let's remember Hugh in our prayers. And yes, ma'am. Gospel according to Anita. Good to see you. Thank you, Johnny, for your words. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. We're going to sing. 231. 231. Yeah. And then we're going to go home after a prayer. And you know, I need my glasses real bad. Chris, you glad to be here tonight? I'm sure glad to see you. Well, will you lead the closing prayer? Thank you very much. Oh, do me so do. Brother Chris.